One of the interesting things about Reiki is that there isn't really any regulatory body. There's no kind of international body or even national bodies that regulate the way Reiki courses are run. Now, on the one hand, this can be good because there's not that sort of overabundance of bureaucracy that typically comes with such things. But on the other hand, the danger is there aren't really any quality standards. And this can be a challenge if you're just looking to do a course for the first time and you see lots and lots of teachers, and it can be hard to tell which courses are going to be really good quality courses, which courses less so. Now, a way the Reiki world has kind of overcome this issue is by the creation of Reiki Associations. And so in many countries, you'll have several Reiki associations, and the idea of them is to kind of guarantee a certain level of quality. They regulate what needs to be taught in the different levels, they regulate the amount of hours the courses need to go, that kind of thing. And so hopefully, if teachers follow the guidelines of the associations, it kind of guarantees at least a fairly decent course. Now, as I said, the issue with associations is always going to be bureaucracy. And often you find, as a practitioner, the one thing you want to do is really just get out there and heal. You want to help the world. You love working with energy. What you don't want to be doing is kind of twiddling about with, forms and, making sure you're ticking this box and following that rule, many of which at times can seem a little bit ridiculous. Now, for the most part, fortunately, Reiki associations do tend to kind of just exist in the background. They don't interfere too much. They let the practitioners, so long as they meet certain requirements, go about their business as they normally would. But due to COVID, due to lockdowns, we've often got this question which has arisen about the legitimacy of online Reiki courses. Are they okay? Now, the position taken by Reiki associations is to totally veto them. They say they are not an acceptable way to teach, and they will never accredit any Reiki course being taught online. Now, is this a good decision, or, is it open to question? Well, I have to admit that before COVID, I kind of would have questioned, in fact, I would have even almost laughed at the idea of there being legitimate Reiki courses done online. I mean, it just seemed all too easy. And there are so many cases, where people slap together some fairly dodgy online course and then they go, oh yes, and now you're a Reiki master in 24 hours. And so that kind of gave it a bad name. And I also thought, I think it probably doesn't work. But then in COVID, once it came along and Melbourne got locked down, and I have to say Melbourne, which is where I do a lot of my work, is the most locked down place on the entire planet. I mean, nobody does lockdown better than we do. We love lockdown. At least our governments do. And so as a result, we're twiddling our thumbs, we're stuck at home thinking, what can we do? And so the idea occurs to me last year that, well, I've got all these courses, I've got people enrolled in courses, we can't do anything. What about if I do a little bit of Reiki work online? Now, I was skeptical myself, and so to kind of cover myself, I decided I'd do a hybrid course. And so a hybrid course basically meant we do one day online, and then in fact, back then I did the entire course online. So I did the entire course online, 2 days, and then later on at the end of the year, when lockdowns ended, I did the entire course again, but I did it in person. And so that way, I met all the Reiki Association's kind of criteria for that amount of hours done and, in attunements being done in person. And I also, though, gave people things to work on in the meantime. I could teach them Reiki skills. Now, to be honest, at first I'm thinking, well, there are certain parts of a course I know I can do well online. For instance, I can talk about the Reiki theory. I can talk maybe about Reiki history. I can teach the meditations. I can teach the Reiki precepts. I can do these kinds of things really probably as well online as I could in person. Where I wasn't so sure was when it got to things like the attunement. Could you really do an attunement online? And then, of course, there's the problem of doing work on each other. How does one go about doing that? And so there are a couple of practical problems with it. But as I said, I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to do the entire course in person anyway, so I can do it as an experiment. Let's see how it goes. And, even if it's an absolute flop, no one really loses anything because we're going to do it again in person. Now, here's what I found though, and this is what really surprised me. The Reiki courses online worked beautifully. They worked basically as well as they did in person. Everyone got the Reiki. So even level 1, they got attuned, they started to practice healing, mostly on themselves, admittedly, in a course. Sometimes I got them to drag in, housemates, etc., or maybe an animal or even just a plant to give Reiki to. But the interesting thing was it worked well. And I was like, well, that is interesting. And so after the weekend where I taught online the first time, I realized, wow, I've got this in-person course, but in actual fact, I really don't even need it. No, I did it, and I needed to do it to satisfy Reiki Associations, but in practice, it worked really well as it was. So this was interesting, and I did several courses like that, several of these hybrid courses, and all of them worked beautifully. And I realized at the end of it that I'd kind of fallen prey to a kind of a logical error. I'd presumed that because Reiki courses had always been taught in a certain way, then they really needed to be taught in that way. But that just wasn't true at all. And an interesting thing is to think that Reiki courses need to be taught in person is in many ways it's sort of inconsistent with Reiki, because if you think of, at least in level 2 Reiki, we teach distance healing. And so what does distance healing do? It enables practitioners to heal people from a distance. It basically goes, you know what? Distance is not a problem. Energy can bridge that. Energy doesn't worry at all about distance. You could be on one side of the world, the person you're healing on the other, and it will be just as easy to heal them as it would really if they're right in front of you. And now all Reiki traditions really accept distance healing. All the associations, they're totally happy with distance healing. So if distance healing works, if Reiki energy can travel across space, why is Reiki suddenly so impotent when it comes to doing things like distance attunements? It doesn't really make any sense. Now, another thing about teaching online, which is interesting, is in many ways, okay, maybe not many ways, but in quite a few ways, it can even be better than the real thing. This is particularly true in Reiki level 2, where we work with the distance healing, because in a normal class, what I'll do is I'll teach them all sorts of techniques, and at the end, I teach them to do distance healing. But in online classes, of course, what I have to teach them to do distance healing so they can even work on each other. So effectively, I invert the order. I teach distance healing first, and then the rest of the class we spend practicing all of the level 2 techniques on each other doing distance healing. And so then students can actually get a really good idea of how powerful distance healing is live. In one of my courses, we're in Australia, and I had one of the students was in Taipei, in Taiwan, and we could see that the distance healing worked on her just as well as on anyone else who were closer by in Australia. And her distance healing worked just as well on people in Australia. So it gave everyone a lot of confidence. And in a sense, it made the level 2 course in that way better, because the key component of it, the distance healing, everyone became much more familiar with it, much more confident with it, thanks to the online format. Now, you might sort of say to yourself, yeah, online's good, but what about things like group energy? Because group energy, of course, is one of the great things about turning up, with other practitioners at a course. That group energy builds, and what you find is that you learn everything faster thanks to the group energy. Now, again, this was one of the things I'm like, I'm not sure how well it will work. Now, I'm not going to say it's necessarily absolutely equatable with in-person events, but curiously, even online, you get some really good group energy. And again, because of that group energy, because everyone comes together live to work together with the Reiki, then you find that you learn everything faster, everything more easily. Now, there are even some other advantages of distance healing, and this is that practitioners get to do everything in their own space. So particularly if you're shy, an introvert, or maybe you've got certain fears, about mixing with groups, etc. often people who suffer from kind of depression and anxiety, they find it really hard to mix in a group physically. But if they do a course online, they can be in the safety of their own space. They can be, also very energetically sensitive people. They find it easier too. Again, you're in your own room, you're in your own space. And so there's not that kind of energetic interference or, just all the basic energies of all these other people in the room with you. And so for some people, this can be an advantage too. Okay, now here I want to also differentiate between kind of two forms of learning online. And one is just, you might watch a video of a Reiki course. The other is actually doing it live. And so here I'm not really commenting on how effective it is to watch a video on Reiki. That may or may not work. But for actual live, it's beautiful because you're there with the teacher in real time. You can ask questions, they can guide you. If they're doing a good job, even though it's done remotely, they can get a feel, they can intuit, any challenges you might be confronting. If you're guiding a meditation, every meditation should be a little bit different because it depends on the energy of the group. You're not necessarily going to just do the same thing every single time. You've got to kind of read the crowd, so to speak. And you can do that perfectly well if the class is live online. Particularly, if you're using something like Zoom where you've got video cameras and so you can see everyone there, all the faces and what they're doing. They can ask you questions through chat box. They can ask you questions normally. And so it actually works pretty well. Okay, now, am I saying that we should suddenly replace in-person courses with online courses? Not at all. Obviously, for most people, given the choice, they'd love to do an in-person course. It is a beautiful thing, as I said earlier, to come together with people, like-minded people who work with energy, to grow and learn. That's a fabulous thing. And you certainly wouldn't want to just replace it with something, but as an addition, as something which you can say, look, there'll be certain circumstances, maybe just because someone lives remotely and they can't travel to study with a certain teacher, or just can't travel to really learn Reiki with anyone because of where they live. Maybe for health issues. There are a lot of reasons why people can't come to a physical course, but they could come to an online course. So what I'm saying is, it makes sense for us to also have this option at hand. It doesn't make any sense for us to be dogmatic. Now, of course, if you're, say, an association, you might doubt this. You might still think, yeah, well, Jeremy might be saying one thing, but is it really true? Can you actually learn effectively online? Well, you know what you do in that case? You test it. You see if it works, and if you find it works, then go ahead. Now, if Reiki work is hopeless online, if it doesn't work, by all means, say that you cannot teach Reiki courses online. But it doesn't make any sense to ban something without actually testing it. That's a bit like those people who say, oh, Reiki, Reiki's terrible, it doesn't work, or maybe it's all placebo. And then you say, well, have you actually tried Reiki? And they're like, oh, no, I've never tried it. Well, if you haven't tried it, how can you judge it? And the same actually applies really for these live online classes. If you haven't tried it, you don't really know whether it works. Now, of course, it's in our nature really often to judge things. As I said, before COVID, I prejudged it. And I thought it wouldn't work. But then I eventually did try it, and I found, wow, it's amazing. It's actually very effective. Now, in future videos, I'll talk about why I even think that doing some courses online will actually really help you grow and evolve as a healer. It'll help you take the next step. That's for a future video, though. For now, I just wanted to say online learning, I believe from my experience, and I've tested it out in lots of unofficial courses. I'll have to say they were unofficial because Reiki Associations never recognized them. But in many, many unofficial courses, I have to say they work beautifully just as well, really as the real thing. So if you're, in a remote place, if you are locked down, if you can't learn normally, or if you just like to learn from the comfort of your own home, then it is going to be a valid way to learn. Again, it's going to depend on the teacher, how good the course is. But just like you do due diligence to find a really good teacher in person, do the same diligence to find a good person online. And if you find that good teacher, then you'll also discover that an online Reiki course can work beautifully no matter what the Reiki Associations say. So hope you enjoyed that video, and I look forward to seeing you later on for more videos. And as I said, also an upcoming video where I talk about why you might just find that if you do some online healing arts, it doesn't necessarily have to be Reiki, but if you do some online learning with energy, that can actually take you to the next level. Because I think the next kind of evolutionary leap that energy workers are going to face is where we really learn to go beyond the confines of, or, the restrictions of having to be present with someone in space, and where we learn to trust ourselves and to trust the kind of interconnectivity of everyone and know that we can heal even remotely. We can connect to people even remotely. So hope you enjoyed the video and look forward to seeing you on future ones.